Hi, hi. Welcome to another live episode of Behind Beliefs and Behaviors. I'm Dr. Maisha, and I'm excited to be here with you on this episode today. I want to talk about what's behind effective communication. Now, I have been talking a lot about communication lately, and that is because that is the thing that I do. I help leaders listen and find the source of miscommunications and misunderstandings so that people can move about the organization feeling seen, heard, respected, valued, and so that everyone in the organization can thrive. That is what I do. I love, 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 love what I do. And so today, I really want to talk a little bit about what's behind effective communication. Because, again, if you've listened to me, you know I've shared that if you think about it, we aren't necessarily taught how to communicate. We learn how to communicate, no doubt. We learn by watching and listening in childhood to our parents, to our caregivers, to whatever it is, whoever it is that brought us up. Then we learn more by interacting with our friends and our instructors, our teachers in life. And then we also learn by watching media. And ultimately, when we get older, if we are leaning into expanding our skill set, then we may listen to books on or take a course on. But we're never taught the nuances of how effective communication comes into play. Like, what's the source of it? And so, what I want to talk a little bit today about is what's underneath the process or what's underneath effective communication. And it really starts with the way we listen. And because I talk a lot about listening, I want to bring in another element, and that is emotional intelligence. Now, the listening and the emotional intelligence is intimately and intricately related because the skill of emotional intelligence allows us to expand our listening in a way, knowing that if you've listened to any of my podcasts and if you've listened to any of my TEDx talks, I always talk about how we listen through these filters and then we label them, a place to be able to interrupt inaccurate labeling of an emotion, inaccurate labeling of negative self-talk or of in effect of incorrect, I should say, self-talk or untrue self-talk. That is where the skill of emotional intelligence can come into play. Now, basically, what emotional intelligence is, it's the ability to identify, to name, to honor and accept, and to regulate and communicate effectively what's going on that we label as emotions. And oftentimes, where there is a gap in learning or where there is an edge in learning, for many people who are conditioned, like myself, who are conditioned to not even know what they're feeling in our body, to be disconnected from those emotions. That's the first step. So, being able to recognize that an emotion is present and then being able to acknowledge and then identify what is that emotion and identify what is the source of that, what is the story behind that that could be elevating the emotion or making the emotion cycle, and then how then do we begin to disconnect or regulate ourselves inside of an emotion that could be rising intensely and communicate and take care of ourselves. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we do that today. What are some tips in which we can do that? First of all, if you are in I think this is probably true these days of many industries, but certainly it's true in certain cultures and certain upbringings that emotions are not a good thing unless they're positive. And this feeds into this concept of toxic positivity. And it has a root, especially the in the Black community and in other marginalized, colonized communities. It has a root. Historically speaking, and particularly in times of enslavement, Black people weren't allowed to feel too good, and we didn't want to show weakness because either of those things could mean certain death. And so there is a conditioning that happens when there's potential trauma involved in feeling one way or another. And so as a result, sometimes we can get dissociated or disconnected, push those emotions down. And then that's a habit that gets passed down from survival from generation to generation to generation and becomes part of culture. And there could be similar stories or even different stories in other cultures of historically why that happened, why that happens in terms of the suppressing of emotions. But I'm speaking particularly from historically the identity that I come from or the identity that I occupy. And so knowing that there's a conditioning there, having the awareness that there could be a conditioning there from whatever background or from whatever past inherited value, belief, or teaching or learning that you did, the first thing to do is to acknowledge that and to begin to how do we unravel that? Well, the first thing is to reconnect into the body and understand what is it that what is it that what is the information that my body is giving me about what I'm feeling. And oftentimes, because we get so disconnected from our head or from our body, and we're in our heads because of necessity for some of us, become of survival, become because of that's what we were just trained to do, then it can be very difficult to identify what's happening in our body and what we're feeling. And even for some where there have been multiple experience of trauma, particularly physical trauma, it doesn't feel safe or good to be in one's body. And I think that's something that not only needs to be understood by oneself, and if you are a person who's experienced that, then it's very important that you seek out a therapy that can safely help you connect back into those emotions. Because again, I don't advocate for you to just try this at home. If you know you have a, 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 a background of deep trauma, physical, especially physical trauma, and it doesn't feel safe to be in your body, then that's something that needs to be worked through with a professional. However, day to day, if if we're just conditioned to be in our minds and not in our bodies, we can begin to take the sensations in our bodies as information and to begin to put a label on them as to, well, what is the emotion? And to be able to accurately label them, that is where we begin to expand our emotional intelligence. And I like the feelings wheel. I like the emotions wheel. And there are a lot of different tools. You can Google feelings wheel, emotions wheel. You can also look it up on your phone in the App Store, and there are many emotional intelligence feelings wheels that allow you to be able to see the range of emotions. Because oftentimes we're taught happy, sad, mad, angry, afraid, guilty, frustrated, and that's the range. There can be a host, a plethora of range of emotions, and it's useful to be able to choose from something that's in front of you so that you can begin to identify the gradations of emotions that happen before intensity rises to a 10. Okay. And so that first step, which is probably the most important, the first two steps, is recognizing there's something going on in the body and the body is giving us information. And then looking at what would we label if we had all the choices laid out in front of us of all of the emotions that were present, what would we choose? What would that what would be the word or the label of the emotion that would most align with what the feeling in our body is? And that's how we begin to build that emotional fluency. And then once we're able to do that, then we can recognize and name the emotion that's there, even if it's just to ourselves. Okay, I'm feeling lonely right now. Okay, I'm feeling melancholy today. Okay, I'm feeling irritable today. Or, okay, I'm feeling whatever that feeling is. Okay, I'm feeling anticipation. Or I'm feeling a little nervous today. And so we begin to have these various words that align with the feeling in our body. And the more we practice, this is the thing, the more we practice labeling, the better we get at labeling before we get to furious, or before we get to terrified, or before we get to um, shame, or before we get to, and sometimes shame just exists from trauma. So there's that. But before we get to these sort of extreme expression of emotion, when we begin to recognize the subtle details of what we're experiencing and then putting a name to that, then it allows us, it expands our emotional fluency. And then we can begin to, when we're in communication with another. So this is where the communication comes into play. Because if we're interacting with another, right, I'm feeling defensive, right? Or I'm feeling activated and I don't exactly know which emotion it is right now, or I'm feeling multiple emotions at once. So when we're interacting with a person and we notice that our body becomes activated, because that's what happens, like our nervous system becomes activated, then we can begin to, the more we practice when we're not activated, the better we are at noticing it when it begins to occur. And then we can begin to name, oh, this is what's happening right now. I need to take care of myself. I need to step away. That's effectively communicating what needs to happen in that moment, right? And the more that we can actually notice it in ourselves, the more our acuity actually begins to widen to be able to notice it in others. And then we can say, wow, it seems like, or I noticed that there's a shift in your language and your in your body language. And what is that? So when we are this is what's behind that emotional fluency, that expansion of emotional intelligence. It begins to have us be able to accurately describe and honor. So this is the other thing about emotional. So there's emotional intelligence. There's the emotional recognition. Then there's something called emotional honesty. Being honest with how we feel rather than pushing it down or trying to make it go away. There's like a level of acceptance to, this is what's happening. And even maybe even a you can add an edge of curiosity. This is what's happening. I wonder what this is. I wonder what's missing, what needs to be held, what needs to be heard, that is having me feel this way. So that level of emotional honesty and even emotional curiosity. And then we go into the regulation. If we're in a circumstance where we notice that emotion is rising quickly, then to be able to have specific tools. And there are many, many tools, and I've done short videos on this, and I will probably do more videos. But when I'm teaching in my organizations, I teach several tools of regulation, but the simplest one is the breath. So even if it's just a recognizing and then taking a couple of deep breaths, sometimes that emotional regulation does require that you remove yourself and give some space, but to have the specific tools to regulate your response or reaction to what's going on in your body in order to mitigate harm that could be caused. That is the next step or level of emotional intelligence. So we have the identification or the recognition, you have the honesty, now we have the naming of it, and then we have the emotional regulation, which can then give you the communication to be able to communicate what's next. What do you need to do in interaction with someone to be able to mitigate harm, or and When you're able to recognize it for yourself, as I said earlier, then you can recognize it with others, and there can be some, if possible, if that closeness or that rapport is present, then there can be some co-regulation there to help them to be able to come back to a space where they feel like they can think about what they need to do to take care of themselves, or you can give them space. Like it seems like there's something going on, and maybe that there's some activation happening. Do we need to take some space? Do we need to take a moment? Do you want me to give you a moment? And this is an emotionally intelligent way to manage inside of an interaction where intensity is rising, and you can see it in yourself and you can see it in another, right? I think this is getting a little hot. Let's take a step back. Maybe we come back to the table with this on a different day. Let's take a 5 minute break, whatever needs to happen. And so behind effective communications, bringing it all the way full circle, is this space of knowing how to recognize, honor, communicate, and regulate our emotions so that our listening is expanded and our response is modulated as in a dance with the person that we're interacting with. Okay. And so I want you to sort of take this and start to notice. The only homework you have today, because I love to give my homework, is to notice. Start to notice what's going on in your body and find you an emotions wheel or a feelings wheel, and begin to notice how just noticing and taking it as information expands your awareness as you walk through the day, as you interact with people. Right? I think that's the most important component, beginning component that feeds into the rest. A lot of times we just pop off. We go from 0 to 10. But to be able to identify and those middle experiences, those mid experiences, is going to be the most valuable thing in learning the next level of emotional intelligence. And I'll share, I know that these skills are often called soft skills. And for those listening without watching, that was my air quotes. These these skills are often deprioritized, undervalued, passed over, assumed to be present. And this is why we have ineffective leaders. This is why toxic cultures and toxic um, organizations and relationships exist, because the people are undervaluing what communication can bring, what emotional intelligence can bring, what psychological safety and creating it, what cultivating trust can bring. And when we begin to, and what that does is that takes us further away from our humanity and from being able to see humanity in others. And that is what a lot of conflict and division and dehumanization, that's where that happens. And so if you are in an organization that is not about dehumanizing people, if you're in an organization that is in the conversation of creating a culture that has your people be seen, heard, respected, valued, and welcomed, feeling like they totally belong, then you're in the conversation of creating psychological safety. And these are the kinds of skills that you need to learn. Yes, there are policies that you can put in place. There are practices you can put in place, but if you put policies and practice in place with people who don't have the skills to execute them on a day-to-day basis, then you're just putting in empty policies and practices, and you ultimately will cause more harm and more hypervigilance, because you'll put these policies with the label of we're making it psychologically safe, but the individuals in the organization in the family, in the company, whatever you're wanting to cultivate that trust, there will be an incongruency in action and in messaging. And that is one of the things that threatens trust and threatens safety and creates hypervigilance and creates the walls going up. And so this is one of the things that I love to do is bridge that gap between what you know and what you can apply on a personal level on a day-to-day basis, because culture is not created only through policies and procedures. Culture is created through people and people interaction. So with that, I will leave you and go apply what I talked about today. Go get you a feelings wheel. Start to notice what's in your body. Start to think about, how do you fare in the recognition of your emotions and the ability to regulate and put space between your what you feel and what you say. And finally, check out my course, Communication That Transforms. It is all about exactly what I'm talking about today, bridging the gap between knowing and doing, both in emotional intelligence and listening, as well as what to say and how to say it. So, as always, I'm committed to you being empowered, because these are the conversations that transform families, transform communities, transform organizations, and that will empower leadership in our next generation. And so, you're the bridge to the future. And until our next episode, stay empowered.